Hey everyone, welcome to this video on the top 5 security tips every organization should be thinking about as that foundational set of steps they're performing. And obviously there's many more things you can build on top of that. I think there are so many security discussions and threats and concerns today, it can be very overwhelming. And when things are overwhelming, there can be a tendency to just back away. And so I thought, hey, if we start with some fairly basic but important things, get those in place, and then you can build on those things in the future. Now, when we talk about building on things in the future, there are some fantastic resources. So I'm going to focus on the Microsoft sort of resources that you have available to you. But there's the security documentation page that goes through things around red teaming and base security things and zero trust architecture, which is huge and forms the foundation of a lot of what I'm going to actually talk about today. Security operations, security access and identities, protecting and governing data. There is the Zero Trust Guidance Center. And then within here, we have the adoption framework. So how we can actually start thinking about implementing this. Then there's things like the Microsoft Security Response Center. And I've got these links in the description so you can go and look at that. But there's a lot of fantastic information available to help you. But what I wanted to do is just go through what I would consider those top 5 security tips. So without further ado, let's really dive into these. And so number 1, we're going to say, and this is going to be no surprise, is strong authentication. Now, it's funny, when you talk about strong authentication, everyone will go, well, if you're not doing that today, you've really missed the boat. And yes, we talk about passwords are bad and how strong authentication is so important, but often a lot of companies haven't done it yet. Or if they have done it, they've not maybe done it in the most effective way. And so take some time and evaluate strong authentication. Now, when we talk about strong authentication, we often think about, obviously, MFA, so multi-factor authentication. So we have the idea of MFA, which, remember, is based on something I know. That could be a password, a PIN. It could be something I have. It could be a hardware passcode token. It could be my phone. It could be my PC. Or it could be something I am, i.e. a biometric, a fingerprint, a facial scan. And the goal of multi-factor is what I want is 2 or more of those things. Now, additionally, we can think of, instead of having a password and one of these things, we can have passwordless, where we are purely using some kind of technology, maybe our phone, and then a biometric or a PIN. And of course, what we can also build on is the idea of phishing resistant. Because I want to really emphasize the point. And often when you think about phishing resistant, the point is, hey, I can have MFA. I can have a code text to my phone. I can have the Authenticator app where I have to type in the number that it shows me. But I can be tricked as a human being. A bad actor could say, hey, I'm sending you a text code. Tell me what it is so I know who you are. Hey, I'm going to send you a challenge. I need you to type in 42. So a user can be tricked. When you have a phishing-resistant authentication method, what these typically really boil down to is the idea of proximity. I can't remotely authenticate. It's a certificate card placed in a card reader in the device. It's Hello for Business. It's using the TPM in my PC. It's a passkey. The phone has to have a Bluetooth proximity or near field communications, or it's one of those things. So I can't be tricked into authenticating a remote user. And so MFA, they're not all equal. You kind of have the worst, which is a text message going through to authenticate apps, going to passkeys and passwordless technologies. So we think about yes, you want these strong authentication, but really think as much as possible, try and move to those phishing resistant mechanisms to help protect your users. Now, additionally, you're going to have different types of things that you're leveraging in your company. So often what we would like to do is we want to understand what is the risk. So can we get an idea of risk? And in Entra, you can have identity protection. And then I might apply different conditions. So we have things like conditional access. So I can say things like, well, hey, if the risk is elevated, then I might require some heightened level of authentication. I might require the device to be known and healthy to my identity system. There's different things we can do. But it is so important to have that strong authentication. Don't forget break glass accounts. With the changes to Azure and the portals that you have to use MFA, it's no good having break glass accounts that are just long passwords anymore. You're probably going to think about having some kind of FIDO2 physical passkey. Typically, we want 2 break glass accounts. Don't call them break glass accounts. A little bit of obscurity, so I get a little bit of extra security. Call them Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Clark Kent. Probably don't use those names. But just use human-like names. And on those, have them just secured using a physical passkey. So strong authentication, it really is the foundation thing we want. For number 2, I would actually think about the idea, and it's going to sound a little bit strange, but less is more. And this really boils down to the idea of least privilege practice, only giving any identity the minimum possible permissions it needs to get the job done. So we think about least privilege. And when I think about least privilege, yes, it's for the carbon-based fleshy things, the human beings, but I also think a bit for my service principals. They're supposed to be a robot. I don't know. My managed identities. We give them just the permissions they need to do the tasks that they need to do. Maybe I create a custom role if required. If the roles that are built in have too many extra permissions beyond what it needs to do, I can create a custom role. And for the human beings, we also think about just in time. That I have a very basic standing set of permissions, but if I do have a more privileged role, it's not there all the time. I have to elevate up to get that extra permission. And as part of that elevation, very often we may have additional requirements. It may do additional checks. If I haven't done a strong authentication already, because I was just doing email before, hey, now we'll make it go and do a strong authentication. So we can do those extra conditions. And the nice thing about these just-in-times is also it's time windowed. So maybe it lasts for 1 hour. It's not there just all the time. Additionally, when I think of permissions and just in time, when it comes to my production environments, this is my production system, and if I have the idea of those humans accessing, well, really, they just shouldn't. I don't want humans touching production systems. They shouldn't be doing deployments to production. I should have pipelines doing the deployment. I have infrastructure as code. Now, in exceptional circumstances, yes, I may need to go in and view something. And that's where I'd use just in time to get an elevated permission. Maybe it has to be approved by a manager. I go through strong authentication. But in normal circumstances, the carbon-based life forms should not be touching production systems. Keep them so they don't have permissions to touch those things. And when I do think about least privilege, it also applies to what is the minimum possible connectivity. So for the different systems, it could be dev to production. Those systems probably don't need to talk at all. But even when I think of production to production, and hey, I have those network communications between those, what is the minimum possible set of communications? Maybe this system only has to talk 1433 to this database server. Only certain systems need to talk to the internet. And when they talk to the internet, maybe they only talk over 443, and maybe it's only to these fully qualified domain names. So always think minimum, minimum, minimum on everything we do. Constantly ask yourself, what is the minimum permissions, the minimum connectivity required for this to work? But there is an emphasis on that word, to work. Don't break things. I remember Mark Manasi used to say you can be secure and out of business, i.e., I put so much security in place that, yes, great, I've done a fantastic job of securing this, but I've done it in such a way that it now doesn't even function, which is not super useful. I don't want to break the business, so I need to find the right balance so that I'm secure, but I'm not restricting the ability for the company to do business, to deliver value, to iterate quickly on capabilities. So you have to find that right balance. Third tip, I want to stay current. And when I'm thinking about staying current, very often there's some vulnerability or attack vector that has already been patched, but an organization is not very quick on adopting changes, and so that vulnerability is just sitting there. So what I want to think about when I'm saying stay current, think about every single layer that exists. So for my hardware, well, there's probably firmware. And I'm thinking about my servers, I'm thinking about my network equipment, my storage area networks, whatever that is, I want to be understanding what's available for it, and I want to be patching it. I want to be patching my hypervisors. I want to be patching my operating systems. I want to be patching my runtimes. I want to be patching my applications. I want to be patching any agents that I might be using for solutions. I want to be patching my antivirus, my anti-malware. I want to be getting the latest definition files. So I want to make sure I'm staying up to date on this. However, what I have to follow is safe deployment practices. And what that means is I don't just deploy these changes to everything all at once. When I have an update, and I've got a whole video on this, but when I have an update, I think about gradually increasing percentages of the population of my environment. So typically we'll do it in ever increasing size of rings. So we deploy the update, we wait a little while so it has a bake-in time to see the effect. Then we deploy it to the next ring, and then the next ring, and then the next ring. And all of the time as we apply it to gradually increasing sizes of population, our confidence is building that this is not going to break our world. So yes, we want to stay current. I want to be patching everything, but we do it in a safe way so that this doesn't actually impact our availability, because availability is really part of resiliency and part of security. If I'm not available, hey, I've broken the core point of what I'm trying to do. So make sure we are staying current. Number 4, what do we as a company really, really care about that we can't replace? I can't buy a new one. I can't rebuild. It's our state. It's our data. If I lose my data, if I lose what makes my company, I'm probably out of business. That's what these bad actors focus on doing. They will go and encrypt all your data. And then they'll try, and if you have a snapshot or backup, they will delete it. So you have to pay them. So what we think about here is I want isolated backups. So I have my data. Probably not this exact data, but you have some data. And what I want to be able to do is have copies of the data that's isolated from this primary space. Now, when we think about isolated, I think isolated in communications potentially, but I think isolated in terms of identities. My backup admin should not be able to just on their own go and delete the backups I take. So I think about, and I'm going to draw a tape because I'm still old, but we have the idea of, hey, I'm taking this and I'm performing a backup. And what I don't want to be able to happen is the backup admin, because if their identity was compromised, on their own could go and delete the backups or could change the retention policy of how many days we keep to essentially get the backups deleted. And so we think about, we want the idea of introducing an isolation. And there's various different things. Now, in the old days, when I was a VAX VMS systems administrator, every morning, part of my job was I would go to the basement, I would take out the big square tapes, I would put it in an envelope, and I would ship it off-site. And then the company would ship back. You'd keep like a 3-week rotation of tapes, and you would keep a weekly for longer, but they were shipped off-site, so that would help protect you from anything that happened to the building. It gave you that certain level of resiliency. So we're thinking in a lot of ways a similar concept that if my building was compromised in those days, if it burnt down or a bad actor got in, well, it's isolated. It's completely separate from what my main data source is, i.e. the servers. So we want the same thing right here, because I want to be able to protect anything that would modify or destroy the backups. So some of the things we can do today is we have things like, in terms of Azure Backup, we have something called Resource Guard. And what Resource Guard does is it requires a completely separate person. So it's another user from your regular backup administrators. They have to release the Resource Guard before I can go and do something with the backup. There's also things I could do, for example, that I could make it immutable. So I can essentially lock the backup, and I can enable it and then lock it so that once that's happened, you can't reverse that operation. I would have no way to delete the backup early based on the retention policy. I couldn't shorten the retention policy. I could make it longer, but I couldn't shorten it. So the core point here is think about where is your state and think about how do I protect it if something here was compromised. So that the identities were compromised. How can I protect my data so if it all got encrypted, I make sure I have that copy of the data. Now, obviously, this means you have to know where your data is and what data you care about. So if you don't have a good handle on that, well, that's where data governance solutions comes in, things like Purview, where it can go and help you discover your data, classify the data, and then I can make sure I'm applying the right protections to that data. And then number 5, I would think about staying informed. It's critical that everyone understands what is happening in the environment. So I'm going to go with, stay informed. Now, this applies at every level. So as a security practitioner, as the security operations, as administrators, yes, you need to understand what are the new types of threat. What do I need to be aware of? But also you want to understand what are the new types of protections available? What are the new techniques that I can use to enhance what I'm doing? I also want to make sure that for all of these other things, think of them as generating signals. Hey, someone tried to log in. There's a network flow. I want to be able to capture as many signals as possible, feed them into my security detection solution, which gives me better visibility, which helps me identify threats, etc. But additionally, think of your users. So if your regular users They need to stay informed as well. Now realize it's not their job. Security, no matter how much we would like to say, no, it is a part of their job. It's not what they consider their job. So you can only get them to absorb a very small amount of information that they will keep. So you think of the biggest bang for your buck. It's no good giving them a huge amount of security related information. They're not going to capture it at all. So you can try and focus on some key things that you want them to be vigilant for. So very commonly, I'm going to think about, okay, so what to look for. And there are some obvious things I can think about. So if I think of the bad actor, in fact, bad actors, we're all going to draw in red. So I have a bad actor. What are some of the things they're going to try and do? Well, phishing. So make them aware of trick type emails. What are some of the 2 or 3 core things? Hey, the sender is external. There's misspelt URLs. Pay attention to those things. I might teach them to, hey, realize these days people are doing a lot of fake QR codes. So if you see a QR code, don't just scan that QR code. It could be doing bad things. But as much as possible, well, can we protect? Actually, that's the wrong place. Hold on. As much as possible, can I think about the protection of the users? So how can I protect them from themselves? So can I put a bubble around my user and protect them? For the email, as email comes in, can I scan it? I look for bad URLs. I look for bad attachments. I look for bad QR codes. Can I do simulated phishing attacks to help educate them on the things they can look for? Can I restrict the sites they can go to? Can I put categories in place? So as much as possible, what can I do to help protect them away from themselves? I put in strong authentication that is phishing resistant so they can't be tricked as easily. So I constantly think about those things. And that was it. Again, there's nothing mind-blowing here, but I think of as this minimum set of things to consider as a starting point. And I talked about those other resources. From there, you can grow on that. If you are using Entra, there's the security score that can give me lots of things to focus on there. For Azure, you have the security center, the Defender for Cloud, that shows me scores with actions I can take. And a lot of other products, there's security scores that give you recommendations and actions you can take. Azure Advisor gives you security recommendations you can take. So build on those things, but practice these. I want strong authentication. I think minimum in terms of permissions, in terms of access between systems, staying current, but in a safe way, not just everything all at once. The things I really care about, I want to have isolated copies of that is protected from a compromised identity. And just stay informed. What are the new threats? And how can I keep my users informed of things to look out for? Well, that was it. As always, I hope that was useful. Stay safe out there. Until next video, take care.